My research has been around the Aware Home and the Aware Home Research Initiative, and especially working with Wendy and others around older adults and how technologies can help older adults function better in their homes. So this project that I was thinking Brad Fain would be presenting today is one that has spun out of some initial ideas that we had in the Aware Home Research Initiative, and that our Georgia Applied Research side, Georgia Tech Research Institute, has taken on as a strategic initiative. So they're putting the internal funding that they have into this project. And Brad Fain is the lead on this project. Unfortunately, his wife was in the hospital last night and is now on medication that she has to be monitored. So I don't know what is wrong with DATHA, but apparently we've had two people with this kind of story where somebody has ended up in the hospital the night before in the last few months. So I'm going to do my best to represent, especially the first couple slides here that are more centric to the human systems group at GTRI. The actual home lab project I'm very familiar with, although there are a number of other people involved in it now, and it's some of those are recruiting and doing many other things. So it's become a fairly big project, and for good reason. We have big ideas. So I hope that this will go well. I'm going to have to cheat a little bit on some notes just in the beginning, but hopefully if there are any questions, feel free to ask along the way. And I was hoping for a bigger group. But, all right, so GTRI are typically involved, or has been historically involved in military type research. And so you'll notice in the first couple slides, there it goes. Did I get to that? Okay. In the first couple slides that there is this military background, but they're trying to expand as military funding goes down into other areas where they can plug into efforts around Georgia Tech campus and help us to be a stronger player. One, Georgia Tech, as the president and administration have defined it as through strategic planning process here at Georgia Tech. So what used to be us and them with the academic side and the applied research side is now becoming a blur, and I think that's great for Georgia Tech, both internally and to the outside world. So I'm sorry, the agenda for today was to do a brief introduction into what, and this is going to be talking about the lab that is now the home base for this, the Human Systems Engineering Lab. We'll do a project overview for the home lab project, get into how we're developing the home lab, as well as the internal research projects that we think will be some starting points for us to get some interesting data on how we can proceed forward with projects, our own research projects, and then we'll take questions and answers. And if you want to, we can do a little brainstorming task to see what kind of ideas we can come up with that might work in the test bed. So the project staff, pretty big, as I mentioned. We have a lot of moving parts here, and especially up front where we're trying to get established with all the database and survey instruments and such, have to have a number of people involved to do that correctly. And as we start recruiting and maintaining this effort, we're going to start including more people along the way. But the primary team is Brad Fain and myself as PIs. Brad is the primary contact in the Georgia Tech Research Institute, and I'm helping with the management and trying to get the word out about this test bed. And Sean Phelps is actually an MD, one of the few that we have here at Georgia Tech, who's acting as an advisor. Buddy Ray is doing the infrastructure development, and that's more the survey instruments and such that I'll mention briefly along the way. Courtney Crooks has been really good at getting IRB, Institute Review Board, and protocols in place to make sure that we're protecting our participants, and also helping with coming up with some of the research ideas that we'll be doing ourselves. Renita Folds and Carrie Bell will be doing recruitment. They already are, with Renita working out in West Georgia area, and then as we get to Atlanta, Carrie and others will come on board. Damon Nix, I know I've met him, but I guess he's working on the database. There's a team behind the scenes that's working on all the database stuff, and they're just now getting up to speed on some of the requests that we've had. And then Carl Blunt and others are really support staff. They're making sure that what we say is correct and following Georgia Tech guidelines and, as well as other guidelines. So this research stems out of past research related to military and product testing that the lab has been doing, the Human Systems Lab, Human Systems Engineering Lab. So they've been looking at cockpit design, really looking at the human side of things. What's the usability? How is it used? Does it work for individuals of certain abilities or the individuals, the target audience in each of these cases? And I know that Wendy's group has significant experience with this. It's very related to a lot of the things that they do, but more on the what can we do for industry, what can we do for military, et cetera, because there are services that can be done there as opposed to the, I mean, there's still underlying research, but it's more service-oriented than getting at well, they're still getting at guidelines, so I better shut up before I get in trouble with the people in the back. All right, so yeah. So the core business is design and testing of high-performance military systems, such as these cockpits. They started in 2000 testing against the requirements of Section 508, which is accessibility requirements for devices like copier machines. And then in 2004 became the test lab for the Arthritis Foundation, which is actually huge. They've done a number of studies on products that are, well, like that coffee jar. Are people able to open these items? What kind of challenges do they have if they have arthritis? And basically confirming that a product that claims that it's designed for people with certain abilities actually achieves that claim. That's Brad. So, yeah, a little younger. Basically, they focus on these three primary techniques for doing these measurements. The functional assessment, which, as I mentioned, looking at how, in this case, it's visual acuity, strength required, what kind of reach is required for different things like the copier machines and such. Fine motor control, so are they able to control the buttons and other aspects of it. And then but considering the actual abilities of the target audience. So in this case, I'm not exactly sure what the individual in the wheelchair, he may have a lower body paralysis, or what is that? Not quadriplegic, but paraplegic, thank you. They do checklist evaluations, which is really going down a set of lists that are like this Section 508 guidelines, but federal requirements, internal assessments that they've done, doing checklists on what we already know from doing these kinds of tests, and then looking at just what the literature says that we should be considering in these cases. So, and then the user testing is very much task performance-based evaluations using people who are representative of the target audience. All right, so with within the lab, and especially with the Arthritis Foundation, these are some of the products that they've been testing out. So are they able to open up medicine bottles? Use staplers. I know that they've done a good bit of testing with those kind of copier machines and such, but I'm not sure it's around arthritic conditions. I even see batteries for hearing aids, which I imagine could be extremely challenging. So obviously they're running a number of tests. They get people into their labs. They have special labs for this over off 14th Street it's actually the GPB building where this group is located, which is Georgia Public Broadcasting. All right. Okay, so why is testing needed? I think this is a great slide representing that. You actually, in traditionally, and this is changing a lot. Where was that? Darn it. The model for the medical model for disability tells us that there's something wrong with the person if their ability deviates from the norm. So that's something that we as a society have to overcome. And we're starting to see this. We're seeing, I know in my neighborhood, the curb cuts are being changed out. And those are all regulations that are being established by the federal government, as well as the local municipalities. And so it really comes down to how can we enable people, and general population, right? If you end up in a wheelchair, you're going to want to have the same kind of features in your environment to allow you to function even if you have wheels. All right. So then I missed this next slide. Oh, no, that's right. And then particularly in this case, for the purposes of the home lab, why do we want to test? Considering that a large portion of our population, I know many of you know this, is shifting to where we have older individuals, 65 and older, increasing because of improvements in healthcare. We're able to address all the acute problems, and now it becomes the chronic problems that we see showing up and lasting through many years. So we need to be able to do this kind of testing to make sure that individuals are able to still function. And these plots on the right here, yes?
The figure that really brings that into focus is boomers. The oldest of the boomers started turning 65 this year, January 1st
right.
of this year, and that will be at the rate of 10,000 per day for the next 20 years. So that just gives you a sense of the scale. It's 78 million people. It's 23% of the U.S. population within that cohort. It's a very large cohort.
And it's really our country we've realized this. We just haven't done well at acting on it. And I think it's kind of a panic now as we see the Medicare and similar type programs, Social Security and others, really getting into that red zone with how is it going to sustain. But also healthcare. So how are we going to help individuals who we're starting to see the decline in functional abilities, and how are we going to make sure that they're able to stay in their homes and function in their homes. And this has been the target of this group for the last few years. How many years have we been doing this? What, 3, 4 years, 3 years? But when I see these plots, okay, the developing countries are outside the lighter blue, and the dark blue is actually the developed countries. And this is a common trend where we have it's becoming inverted in the number of younger individuals compared to older. So when the society starts changing like that, you have fewer working people supporting these kind of systems, like social systems, like Social Security and Medicare. So people who are actually working, providing that security blanket, so to speak. And also, many of those people who are working will be caring for their parents. So how can we help people with independence to alleviate some of that burden? And continuing on this idea of why we test, obviously risk reduction, that's a huge one. We want to make sure that we're able to capture the insights of the consumer. So what kind of problems do they have? How can we build up a knowledge base that allows us to address these concerns so we don't have to, so we have something in place initially, and the testing is based on understanding already in place. FDA usability documentation, this is one reason we're setting up this home lab project. Product effectiveness, is it doing what it claims to do, and what kind of challenges show up, especially over time. We may do an initial evaluation, it doesn't show up, it's very novel, but as people start using it over time, that's when the real problems start appearing. And that's the marketing claims kind of falls under that product effectiveness that I mentioned. So, all right, so with the project overview, as more of these products are starting to come into the market, and I think this past year, 2011, we've seen a real increase in these types of products that are intended to help individuals function in their older adults especially function in their homes. It's like the industry has suddenly gone, oh, we need to play here. Let's come up with something that can fit into this market because it's a huge market. And I know that there's going to be a lot of shakeout. Companies some companies will move up to the top, others will disappear. But we need to make sure that we have something in place that can help them with getting the FDA requirements in place that allows us to help with, as these products are entering the market, addresses some of the issues that may come up. So what kind of feedback can we give to the company, or what kind of material can we give to them that might become used in their marketing because an independent group has done this evaluation of it. So really we're looking to make Georgia Tech as the go-to place for this type of testing, the health and wellness type product testing. All right. So I'll get into the details of what the goals are, but really, as I've mentioned, the hope is to take products, put them into people's homes, and we're looking at 50 and older as our population, see how they use them, what kind of usability challenges are there, and there may be an initial stage to this where we do this functional assessment in focus groups or in independent interviews. But the lab is intended for, this home lab is intended to get it in actual people's homes long term. It could be 1 month, it could be 3 months, it could be a year. But what we're targeting right now is up to 6 months, because that's where it seems to be one of the key points for industry doing testing. Yes?
What you were saying about the shakeout of companies, I know at the Atlanta Regional Commission we get calls just continuously of new providers, especially in the home care industry. And right now I think the state of Georgia licenses over 1,000 private home care providers. And unfortunately, sometimes it can be people, just kind of starting out without the background and knowledge and expertise in some of the, they're investing a lot of resources. And sometimes it's duplication of services, sometimes it's just not really understanding, what the demographics are. And many times it's providers that do not have an awareness of an individual's inability to pay. They think that the market is there, the
Right.
demographics are there, and the business is there. But when it really gets down to it, people often cannot afford the services. So my question is, I know on the research side of having individuals participate in research, but what if providers call us? Is there a connection? Is there,
So,
the go-to place, would there be something in the research arena that providers could benefit?
So one of the, I don't know that has come up except for the providers like insurance providers who, like Humana and Aetna and others, who are looking at what kind of products could help reduce their costs, whether it's wellness leading into retirement or prevention or whatever. There are a number of products that they're interested in. But from a care provider point of view, there are products that we will, as we do this testing, the intent is to work with the companies doing the testing, or maybe the larger providers, that if you have a company like, there's a huge one up in the Northeast that, that does a number, is starting to use technology in their practice, and they wanted to determine how they would use certain products, and if the products have any challenges. So this was just in discussions. We don't have anything formal, but so I could see in that kind of a scenario that the provider might benefit, but for the smaller company, the way they might benefit is that our research shakes out some of the problems with these systems. So if they adopt them as their own, they can look for those kind of claims. And I don't know that we have a certification per se on this, although it has been considered, but that might be something that we put into play, where that you look for that certification to see what kind of, that it's been actually evaluated. So I guess that's a long answer to your question, but there will be some benefit. I think it's going to be more indirect than direct to the smaller groups. Yes?
What kind of information are they looking for? So what kind of information might we be working towards providing them? Well, when they're calling the aging division, they're calling because of marketing. They want to market their services. They want to get their information out. And many times, they may or may not have products associated with the services. A lot of times it's just
So you're thinking of maybe I understood you wrong. Are you thinking of like the providers, the ones who are actually doing the care, or are they coming to you with new product?
It's both.
Okay.
It's primarily providers who are coming, and the first call is, I want to be on your database, can you send me some clients? And of course, we can't do that.
Right.
We're not a marketing arm.
Yep.
We're an educational arm for them. But under all that question is just not really some of the background that they need, maybe if it's based on research, if it's based on demographics, if it's, before they're getting to the place where they're going in for licensure.
So it'd be nice if you had something that you could point them to.
Yeah, exactly, yeah, I think so.
We've not only seen that from other vendors, but we've experienced this ourselves to a degree, and that is not putting enough focus on the affordability. Who will pay for the product or service?
Yeah.
You got the first question: is it reimbursable or not? So will Medicare, Medicaid, or insurance pay for it? And if you think it will, getting approved is like getting a bill through Congress. I mean, it is a major. I mean, it's years of work, especially if it's a new procedure. And if it's not reimbursable, which is the vast market, then now you're into the private pay world, and affordability is huge. And it's a much, we live in a world where everybody's got, iPhones and all this stuff, but the mass market out there, every dollar is really a big deal. And even modest amounts per month takes a lot of thought.
It does. And unfortunately, I see so many people that haven't done even that background that you're talking about, and, I mean, it's unfortunate because you've got some people with some, wonderful ideas and commitment and passion, and, a couple months later, they've either not got started in what they're doing, or they've taken that and not done it.
Yeah, I think with the speaker we had last month from Hokulea Health Navigators, Duane Lancone, something like that. Their product was an extension of the Grand Care system, and they had actually wrapped a nice model around that, and they wanted to reproduce this across the country. But I think it's that ecosystem that it has to work, and that's, I think, what you're getting at is if you're marketing, you can't necessarily pick up something and move it from Hawaii to Atlanta. You really have to consider and understand what's going to work in that market. And I agree, the affordability of this is going to be key, and that's one of the reasons we want to try to get at a representative population. I know it's going to be more challenging to get at the lower income demographics. But we're trying to work with the naturally occurring retirement communities to get some of those individuals, and I think we're looking for suggestions on how to expand our participant base. Okay, so the goals for the project, we want to get the test bed and set up 50 homes very quickly, and we actually are up to, well, it's interesting, we have 58 participants, but 20, I don't know, somewhere in there, 27 homes. So a lot of couples. And that's just because of the nature of the groups we started with as word of mouth, and I think that'll be changing very quickly. But our goal is to get up to 150 individuals by the end of year one. Hopefully that'll be more than 75 homes. And be able to start testing a product in this setting so we can understand what kind of challenges come up. And we have a product lined up that Humana is sponsoring. You'll see it on another couple screens here. That will allow us to do that kind of testing, and we've already set up the protocol for it, the plan for the testing, how we're going to evaluate it, and we're just waiting on the product now. It hasn't come off the manufacturing line yet. We're also looking to perform that longitudinal research that we're interested in with some of the participants this year, as we're starting to build up the marketing to industry, the outside world, people who might pay for a evaluation in this test bed. And then as we move forward, we want to try to get up to 550 participants over the next 3 to 4 years. We have a fairly, I'd say aggressive, but in seeing how things are moving forward, it's actually moving faster than I thought. Now that we've gotten moving. We're expecting to need a management system. Right now it's all paper-based, capture of information in 3-hour interviews in the homes. I'll get into a little more detail of that in a few minutes, but we're going to need a database to capture all this information and to allow us to sort through, find the right individuals for the right product is the goal. So that's why 550 is the target. We're thinking we can have 100 to, hopefully 80% of these numbers filled at any given time doing studies that are either related to our research or industry research. And then we're also looking at beta sites that we have a suite at Wesley Woods in the towers there. I'm not sure how long they're going to let us keep that, but that is one example of a place where we can get technology into a population where it can be in a controlled environment and have people come to that room instead of trying to travel to the Aware home or similar facilities that are not convenient. So we're trying to find these communities that will be willing to work with us to set up some of these beta sites once we start seeing that interest. And I've talked with a couple of communities that have said, yeah, we'd love to think about it, but when it actually comes down to, can we do it, we'll see if that works. But the idea was Aware Home as an alpha site, test in the Aware Home, get all those kind of problems worked out, and then move it to a beta site where we get at that population. Yes, Karen.
I don't know if you've already talked about this, but as far as the industry products that you guys are interested in evaluating, are these already like marketed products, or are we talking like the prototype level?
Yes.
Prototype.
Both.
Because they
So,
a long-term assessment.
right.
You can't prototype. Well,
Right. So,
curious.
work. Okay. Key. Oh, that doesn't work either. Awesome. Oh, maybe because I was typing. There we go. So types of products. This is one that's just getting started on the market. They've already done the prototype testing. They've started a company. They're putting it on a manufacturing line in China. Chinese New Year got in the way, and that's why we're pushed back on our testing. It was supposed to start in January. It looks like it's going to be March now. But this is Humana wanted to know if this product would work for people who are coming up toward retirement, into retirement age. So 60 and older was the population they're looking at. It's a weight loss coach. So it has a little screen on the front of it that gets feedback from the individual and provides feedback to the individual. It does not, actually it does talk. The mouth doesn't move, but the eyes blink. So the eyes are actually cameras that can detect where the person is and turn toward them when they have to activate it in the morning by tapping on the shoulder. But it's called Autom, A-U-T-O-M, and it is from Intuitive Automata is the company.
They have to get permission from Pixar to use the shade. There's a lot of some of the,
I don't know. Yeah, you're thinking of, oh golly, Wally? Yeah.
close.
Yeah.
I may hear from Pixar eventually.
Well, the robots take on all shapes. I'm sorry? We have not done the testing ourselves. They have tested it in populations in the Boston area around MIT where it was developed. So they have initial claims. They had an initial study protocol that we actually got a hold of, and we adjusted it for our protocol. And then we're going to put this into people's homes, and at 20 homes, and then with the robot, and then 10 with a control group of paper weight loss study or diary. It provides feedback. It's supposed to capture, it's not going to capture directly from a pedometer, but they're supposed to use the pedometer information to enter in their steps. Also enter in nutrition information where they can look up, much like on the Fitbit site where you're monitoring nutrition. I know there are other sites that do this, where it already has a preloaded list of common foods at restaurants or at home that you can select from. So one of our goals is to see what kind of challenges people in this older age group than they initially tested in will have with it, and if it can be a viable product for Humana to consider taking further. The glow cap is another example of a technology that might be tested in this test bed. This was another interest of Humana's. It may be an interest of I mean, it sounds like it may be either used in our research or a similar type of product, but the goal was to see what kind of challenges people have. It's designed with a much easier to use cap, but when, how does the alerting work for individuals? Do they like it, dislike it, and especially over time, when it's calling them, when they don't take the medication, it calls them after an hour. And I know this is very annoying because I've got a bottle over at the Aware home that keeps triggering a call to my office. So when I'm not there, it's fine, but it's kind of annoying when I have to answer the phone and go through them. There's one, you have to hit one or they'll keep calling you back. So anyway, those are some of the things I'd love to hear from the individuals who are actually taking the medication, unlike me, who I just have this demo unit. What do they like or dislike, and what would they recommend? So we could make recommendations to the company or to other possible medication technologies. This other OFT 210, I don't even, it's basically an ankle bracelet that tracks GPS activity, and so location aware, as well as getting that actigraph, how active someone is. It's tamper-proof, so that would imply that you could lock it on someone's leg. I don't know that this will be the technology used, but thinking of these type of products, what kind of challenges would they have? If it's something that needs to be removed daily, what kind of challenges do they have with the mechanism for getting it on their leg? I keep thinking of the Fitbit. Will they remember to take it off their clothes? That's why I have it on my belt, so when I take off my belt, it falls off on the ground if I forget about it. So, yes, Kara.
So I just had a question about, so when you evaluate these products, I'm sure some will be highly acclaimed and others might need much improvement, right? Like the target population has problems with this, that, or the other.
Right.
So is the goal of the independent review that you're doing to basically inform like next generation products, or how to improve the product, or offer training or instruction?
So,
You know,
yes to all of those. The training and instructions is probably one that will shake out just because of that. That's the kind of research that they've done in the past in this group. So when you're considering these kind of products and they're already on the market, we don't want to put something, we're not going to publish something unless the company's open to us publishing it about this testing. So a white paper that we do co-published with the company was one of the, in talking with Simple C folks and Dan Pompilio, that was one of the things he thought would be very useful for companies and a definite value. Feedback on how to improve future versions, absolutely beneficial to the companies. And then FDA requirements to meet, you have to have a significant population tested and go through a lot of this usability. And we're starting to see this more prevalent now as these products are becoming more health-centric. That definition seems to be expanding even into apps, so apps on mobile phones. So we may see some of that market coming in here as well. We'll see. But that was the intent, was to provide feedback, to provide feedback on how you could improve, provide a white hat publication on when we've done the testing, what how well it performed at achieving how effective it was at achieving its claims, and then that could be used as marketing materials if they'd like to. Yes.
I'm sorry, I don't know if I missed this information, but is there a standardized evaluation, or I would like to know, I know that you're evaluating these products, but how they're evaluating them having.
Right. So that is really up to the nature of the study. So if the company comes to us and says, we want to know how all this works in general, then there will be, this group has all these tools that they use for evaluating, much like I'm sure Wendy's group has, that will be the core of that testing, but then there will be some testing that's specific to each product as well. So it depends on how hands-on, I guess, they want us to be in the process, and of course that'll increase cost if it increases effort.
Do you think that would have been beneficial to think about a more standardized way of testing or evaluating these products?
I think that would be a very good question for Brad to, to define whether that, what the tools are they currently have and how those. I'm sure that they will be adjusting these as they go, as they find other concerns in these products. But I think it's a very good point, and one that I should take back to Brad and ask. In the participant recruitment, this is what I stated earlier, we're looking at a population of 50 and older, trying to get a representative population at least around the Atlanta area for now, and we'll see how challenging that is. We're just getting started on really reaching out to organizations that may be able to help us in recruiting. But can we get this good sampling of individuals? We want to be able to ensure that they will at least expect to be in their homes 6 months or longer, because that's key to our long-term research. We don't want to have somebody up and move in the middle of a research project, although that could happen. We know that. And there's also this built into the model for this. We expect that there will be attrition. People will fall off. They won't want to participate. They may pass away. We have to be prepared to keep building up the numbers to keep them at the. We're thinking that extra 50, when we say 550, that extra 50 will be our margin of recruitment each year.
Will any of this information be able to get on the street? Or is that going to be pretty privileged?
As far as the study of the products, it really depends on the agreement with the industry. So there are going to be some research projects that we're going to be doing internally that will be funded by our own research, and that information will definitely make available through publications. That's actually key to we want to keep the individuals engaged. So one of our goals is to have at least one activity that they're involved in every few months, whether it's just following up with a phone call or actually having them do. I'll talk about some of the studies that we're considering internally, but snapping a picture every day, or just to look at some of the questions that we have in our research, but also keep them engaged in the effort. So that should be published when we get those findings. Yes?
Are you breaking the age 50 and older into segments by age? Because I can think of, 80 plus, maybe very different.
So this is where the representative population comes into play. And I keep bringing this up at our meetings on how are we actually going to, we need to start defining what that breakup is. Right now, I think we're just trying to get numbers. So we actually have a sampling that's actually older than, I think it's older than 65. And we've gotten up to about 85 in the age range. But it's a great question, one that we need to make sure we're addressing. And the other requirement is this access to a telephone, cell phone, some way that we can easily communicate with them. And we're also thinking of little iPad or tablet type kiosks we could put in the home to communicate with them as well. Get some survey data along the way or something like that. So there we go. 58 participants recruited. We had a little stall because we had to do an amendment for human subject testing. So this week we were expecting to not recruit, but starting next week I think we'll be starting again. I think that approval will be coming in soon. So we're pretty much working to get the word out to anybody, but alumni is one population that we think may be very valuable and willing to participate, but it may also skew the results. So we have to be careful about that. We're also looking at senior centers. I mentioned naturally occurring retirement communities. I think we're trying to keep, we want to get pockets of people. So we don't want to have 100 people at one location. We'd like to get maybe 10 at a retirement community or 10 at the naturally occurring retirement community. But what's nice about the naturally occurring ones is they are in their own homes. So it's a different kind of setup than in these traditional retirement communities. So we want to see how this starts panning out as we do that marketing for recruiting and getting getting the word out. But very open to suggestions there as to where we might go. I know that Kim McCrae, who we've had here speaking a couple years ago, had talked to me recently and suggested Walter Coffey, who's the director of Leading Age here in Georgia. We used to be Georgia Association for DATHA, I think it was. Okay, so we had to put this in there. What the Home Lab is not, we don't want to be a marketing tool. And I think that when you asked about the publications, that's something we're going to have to figure out is how do we provide this kind of truthful data, but in a way that obviously we don't want to deter companies from coming to us. We want to have, we want to be able to produce results ourselves that are not skewed toward what a company wants to see. So we have to keep that white hat aspect of it. A place to test products that are extremely early stages of development, that's true to some extent. We actually have the beta sites that we're trying to set up there to help with that, but it is not intended for those products. As Dennis Folds, who's he's the chief research engineer or research scientist at GTRI, has said we don't want goobering around. We don't want researchers constantly going into people's homes, but we are considering a smaller subset of homes in order to do that kind of assessment, so the early stage assessment, because it's going to be useful to us, it's going to be useful to industry possibly as well. Okay, so what we will do, we will be compensating participants for their time. In fact, GTRI has a set policy. I can't remember the numbers, but I know for a 3-hour session, I think we rounded it up to $50 for that 3-hour induction interview. And I'll get at some of the details that come into that in a minute. We will be protecting the identities as is required by all human subject testing. Identities and personal information of project participants. We're keeping the identities separate from any of the data. In fact, we just had a discussion the other day of how we do that and how we, HIP is not on the screen, but how we comply with the federal regulations in doing so. So right now, none of that information is in the databases. It's all on paper. But as we get this set up and approved, it will move on over so we can do more better searches of the data. And we will not charge the participants for participating in the evaluations. So one of the questions that has come up is if they like certain products, will they stay in their homes? This is something that we have to work out with each product vendor. So. And we've had this chat with Humana. They seem to be open to it. The question is, can we do it from the subscription standpoint, which is what that little robot, how that little robot functions is $200 cost up front, and then it's a monthly subscription of, I forget, 20. It's somewhere in that $20 to $30 a month range, I think. But since we're evaluating the product and that company is very involved, they may waive that service charge for some period of time is what we're thinking. So. Yeah, so this is all the information that we'd like to collect. We want to understand as much as we can about the individuals involved so that when we get products brought to us, whether they're social communication products or medication or robots for weight loss, we can identify the right people to ask if they'd like to participate in the study. So it's very much, and I mean it's opt-in, but we want to be able to make sure that we know we're targeting the right individuals before asking them about the studies. Relationship information. What's their social network look like? What are their communication preferences? That's a pretty big one. And then any of the, we're looking at the history. So we're not actively capturing information about the individual at this point, but that may be something that comes into play for one of these studies is here's a product that we want to test, but we need to do other assessment in the background. So maybe it's capturing what kind of socializing they do beyond that social technology that they're testing. Personal information, this is obvious. We want to get at the health information, the demographic of the individual, and as I had mentioned earlier, trying to get at that lower incomes and representative population is going to be key. And we're also mapping out their homes. So this is part of that 3-hour induction process, and one of the longer tasks is to go around and take snapshots of what technology they already have in their home and getting a map set up of their home. So when we do get these calls, if they say, do they have stairs in the home, we know that. If they are asking about where their product could go, we want to make sure that something like a weight loss coach robot can actually fit in their home, because we know that there are much smaller homes where there may not be space for this. Any questions there? Because I know that this is going to be one of the questions that will come up in the communities and as we reach out to individuals. Okay, so this is all about the data management side of it and everything that we're promising about keeping it private information, HIPAA compliant. The tracking of past communications, that's more about the management side. So we want to make sure that we are connecting with the individuals at least once every 2 months in a phone call that helps us update their information so we keep the database up to date. We also want to have that kind of personal relationship with the individuals so that if they have a concern or want to get out of the test bed, they feel like they can call us and talk about it. The relationship management is going to be handled once we get the database up and running. There will be, it will allow us to keep a record of who we've contacted and when, and who we need to follow up with today or in the next week. And all this, right now at 50 people, it's not that difficult to manage. It's when we get up to 550, it will be. So that's why we're building up as we go, trying to get this in place so we can continue to function as we should at capacity. And we definitely want to be able to perform these queries on the data to understand who the right people are to choose.
And you have a database administrator selected, and you've got...
We have a team actually that's dedicated to that and the management of the data we're trying to automate make it a digital induction interview so that information translates directly into the database. Right now it's all paper, which is definitely slowing down the process.
Will you go out to manufacturers and say we'd like to test your thing, or are you just going to let them come to you?
So it's going to work both ways. We're hoping to get the marketing worked up to where if you're searching for something like this, we'll be in the top hits. We'll see if that actually works. But we're also actively going to, in fact, during November and December, I was actively going to conferences and finding possible vendors that we would, starting an initial conversation with them, and then I'm going to follow up with them now that we're getting our marketing kind of together to start asking.
Kind of a mini consumer report?
I think to some extent, in order to sustain this test bed, it's got to be the industry has to buy into it. So they've got to understand the value, and that's one of the things we have to build up is the reputation for doing these kind of studies and getting the name out there, which is, this first study with Humana was one that we had a relationship already. We talked through it. They said, let us help you. And the goal, we're actually underwriting some of the study as well so that we can start, get something in place to brag about. So we're getting this marketing aspect of it spun up now as well with the hope of companies coming to us, but also targeting companies and saying, hey, do you know about this, this service? So it's how we actually compile all this data. I suspect that some of this will be available on our website, especially if it's internal, as I mentioned before. As companies come to us, that's a relationship that I really need to understand better. What's going to be acceptable or not. Because talking with Simple C folks who I know are very open to this, they're saying, it doesn't matter if it's bad. Let's get it out there. It means we have to improve our product. And as long as we're working with you to do this, it shows that we're being proactive. And so that's the kind of conversation I would hope would happen. But at the same time, we don't want to have somebody fold just because we publish information about their product.
Well, yeah, if they've got problems, they want to fix it before it gets out of the market.
Exactly. Right. So that's one of the goals, is to fix it before it gets out on the market. The other is, if it's on the market early stage, to help them fix it in the next, maybe it's just software updates, but to help them fix it in the next round.
I was just thinking, you can also think about ways to convey the lessons learned without identifying.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that was, generally, that was one of the goals, was to get this kind of, whether it's just information we're collecting from the individuals on a regular basis or it's specific to a product, there's information that we'll be able to share and certainly lessons learned that will be captured in our publications store, where whatever that's. I don't know that I'm sure GTRI has something set up that they support that with, and I know that campus does. So, yes.
This is very interesting. I know you have been talking to Dan about this. You have about 50 subscribers or participants now, and I guess that's about 10% of the number that you want.
That's right.
Term. And I know you want to be careful about grouping too many in concentrated locations because it may skew the data, but it's still a formidable challenge getting, 10 times that number.
Yeah.
And there's the administrative workload required to manage the participant activities.
Mm-hmm.
So naturally occurring retirement communities would seem to be very attractive, but then that coordination piece to that is formidable because there's no natural nexus on all that. I would recommend at least part of the mix. We've had great luck working with formal continuing care retirement communities, CCRCs. And when you find the really good facilities that are well run, they generally have an appetite for bringing new services to their residents. And our very first location has been our best, which was Presbyterian Village out in Austell, particularly well-run facility. It's nonprofit. There's just a lot of great qualities about that model. But that's 60 acres. It's 650 residents in one site. I was out there Saturday. The cottages at the top of the hill, the people might be in their late 60s to early 70s, still own automobiles and are fully independent, and might just be partaking of the fitness center and maybe taking some of their meals. And then as you move through the full range of services, you move to the tower, still independent. At some point, probably they give up their car and they're on the campus more, depending on the bus and all, but still very independent. Move to assisted living, move to skilled nursing, and then hospice. And so you have a range of people there, 660 of them, from maybe late 60s up in the mid-90s,
Mm-hmm.
the full range of needs and mobility. And you might find, I'm using them as an example, but there's plenty of those, you might find the administration sponsoring some of the coordination activities. So you could get maybe 50 users
Right.
in one campus, one place to visit, but one person that might help with some of this. And they would be more receptive to someone that's in the community helping with some of the data collection and, like you said, the intrusion into into their apartments and all. That's a really big deal.
It's interesting. I actually got you guys in touch with Presbyterian Village way back, and now my contact there has left, and so I asked Jason Zamer, who founded or helped in founding the company, to get me back in touch with someone out there. So it's kind of gone full circle.
Yeah, and there's quite a few CCRCs, and some are really good. And they're probably, I would suggest, the nonprofits before the for-profits.
Yeah.
But that won't necessarily always be the case.
The other challenge with the NORCs, I've talked with Karen Harvell and to get permission, and they basically wanted to ensure that they weren't liable for anything. So they've said, look, we'll put your marketing materials in our facilities, the locations that they actually do have, which are like where people come to learn and dine, learn computers, anyway. But we don't want to be actively recruiting for you, and that's fine, I think. So it may vary depending on the community, but I think with 550, the point. I was considering these kind of retirement communities when we started the feasibility study of how do we build this up, and I think you have to understand that there is a higher income in most of those communities, and that's one of the things that we wanted to be aware of. But it's also interesting to have, you want to have collections of 10 to 20 people because of some of the types of testing we want to understand. How does it change over a group, and especially in the same demographic, right? So I wouldn't want to do the whole community, but definitely like 10 to 20 people would be, I think, of interest, and we may go beyond 550 participants when we get done, by the time we get done with this.
Your demographic area, are you looking at the Atlanta region? Are you looking at the state of Georgia?
Yeah, originally we were thinking that it would start in Atlanta and then try to get out to rural, and what we've talked about, and this is, right now we're just trying to get numbers quickly, and I think that as we get into year 2 and 3, If it's proving successful, then we will be getting into those, how we get into those other areas. We found that most of the population is definitely in city centers. I had to take all the data in Georgia and actually reshuffle it because it wasn't presented in that way. It was presented by age per population, which if you look at some counties, there's a huge older adult population in some counties, but over the whole population of Georgia, it's not that large. So we're trying to consider Georgia as our, we want to do a representative population of Georgia. And that will include rural, but we got to get our act together first locally so that we understand what the challenges are as we move further out. So increase travel time and getting people in the areas that can help in managing and such. So we are using instruments for the survey capture. This is Lime survey has been the choice that the GTRI folks came up with in order to more automate that paper, what's currently a paper process. So right now they're sending the paper in long forms to the individuals before we go out and visit them. And most of them have filled them out before we get there, which is a great time saver. However, we want to have the opportunity for them to do it online, to allow our researchers to go out there and fill in a survey when they get there. And so we're looking at ways that a tablet version of this survey could be available as well as online for the individuals. And we know that people are going to have different access to internet. So some of the surveys that we're doing, the mental awareness one is actually, we are not excluding individuals who have dementia, but we also don't want it to be, we want to make sure that people are independent enough that they could actually participate in these studies successfully. So if they or their legal representative are not able to sign consent, that's an obvious one. We have some rules in place that they're following for excluding individuals, and that's really going to be determined during the recruitment process. Okay, so what types of, this is infrastructure, so this is what could we have in the homes, and this was where the real expense starts showing up. So initially I came into this thinking, we want to have 550 homes with all this technology in place, and then I started looking at the numbers, everything adds up. We have been looking at lower cost technologies, sensing and such, to give us understanding of activity in the home or similar. But we're talking 3,000 a home, and it becomes cost prohibitive over time, and the numbers that we had. So starting small, we wanted to have gateways available that would allow us to provide internet to products that don't have it already. Now the Autumn robot has a cellular connection, so hopefully that'll work, but if it doesn't, we'll have a gateway to fall back on, which is basically a device that plugs into the wall, whether it's a big wall wart or a separate cord like your modem, and allows you to connect these devices to the internet.
Are you going to kind of have a checklist? If we come across something we think is kind of neat and innovative, I guess we just go ahead and send them to you and let you kind of screen them out?
Sure. I think that would be very helpful. If you come up with, if it's if it's close enough to the market, okay, or in the market, then it's definitely something we would consider. If it's earlier stage, we may still consider it, but for beta site or even evaluating in the lab, in the local labs here at Georgia Tech before putting it out into people's homes. But
we deal a lot with home modifications and technology. It's kind of an area that's really expanding.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of what is out there?
Right. So there is a list. We need to have some kind of a list that makes people available what's out there. But I'm also thinking of like the apps problem. There's so many. Can we maintain that list? But I think if there's something that you come across that you think maybe necessary to test in this type of environment, that would be great if you could forward it to us, and we'll follow up with you or the company.
There's also
Pretty soon.
desires that we want to see out there.
Mm-hmm.
You might have an idea where, this company has a
Right. So that's I'm trying to stay aware of what's out there as far as sensing and products, and but it's gotten really difficult over the last couple of years to keep up with that, unless I have something driving that, like a presentation I have to do on it. Yeah, but this very good point that just having that knowledge of what's out there and what's possible and what works that's something I think everybody could benefit from. And I'm not sure if is it Cheryl? What's your name? Kathy. Yeah. Are you guys keeping a list of?
We do have in our resource database products and services. You know, again, it boils down to the inclusion, exclusion criteria. You have to be an established service provider.
Okay.
No modifications, you have to be either an architect or have the CAP certification.
To be in the list. But as far as like products, like what we're testing here, are you keeping a list of those, or is that okay? We had talked about this. I wasn't sure if I couldn't remember if anything was actually set up on that.
Brian, on connectivity, which has always been a real challenge. You know, the 4G data cards, the little MiFi cards for
Yes.
us and AT&T.
Yep.
They're fast. If you have the signal, they're really fast.
Yep.
And you know, they're in the $35 or $40 a month. So that can solve it. It's still an affordability issue.
Mm-hmm. We actually found one, I think it's this middle one here, that was Sprint, that I think we could get for $20 a month or something like that.
And that might be clear. That might be.
Yeah, actually probably is.
Yeah,
Probably right. Yeah.
And that's really spotty. We've tested all these.
Okay.
And we've had the best luck with Verizon's MiFi card.
Mm-hmm.
And it's full box.
And I think, especially the 4G, Verizon's, yeah.
It's generally faster than your sort of cable or DSL.
Yeah, I found I was getting like 24 megabits per second when I had the testing for John, actually.
So that takes connectivity out. The other thing to consider, and there's 3 or 4 companies over at ATDC that have jumped on this since December, is the Kindle Fire.
Mm-hmm.
$199, Android tablet. It's a beautiful device. Does everything any of the tablets do for $199.
Yeah, so in the home, that gets the cost down. Yep, it sure does. Over an iPad or so, yep. Yeah, great suggestion. And this is what we're just starting to look at these things for the home that might be, a Fitbit or a similar type of actimeter. We'll just call it a pedometer. Maybe a great tool to have for some of these products, or it might not. So that's just something that we put in there as a possibility. Camera that can automatically upload photos for us. That's actually something we're considering for one of our internal studies, but that may be useful for the participants to have in their homes anyway. I don't know that it would be this fancy of a camera. They may use the camera on the tablet. We just have to figure out what will work, and so that's going to be a learning process. And these are some of the internal projects that we imagine might occur, that we might do in the test bed. So medication compliance study, and it's, I'll just step through these, it might be easier. So they're evaluating a scale right now in the GTR labs to determine if the scale could be useful enough to determine which medication was taken and how much was taken. So, and it's like milligram level scale, and we don't know if it's going to work or not, but that was the idea. Let's put it into people's homes and just something simple. It's already technology that's polished, but what we're looking for is can they use it? What challenges do they have? Because it guides our future research that may be a product with a scale built into it. The camera taking, this was based on a project called the Intelligent Bathroom, where there was a mirror part of this that would have a visible a traditional camera and then an infrared type camera to take pictures of the face over time in the bathroom, so that every time they come into the bathroom, they're asked if they would take their picture now, and they approve the snapping of that picture. And then we look at changes over time that may indicate some kind of cancer growing under the skin or other kind of problems that may be of concern. And of course, where this is very useful is in detecting, tracking things like moles on your back or that you can't see. So that was, or it could detect that you have a fever one morning with the infrared camera. That's another possibility. But they wanted to test this out, just see if people snap pictures of each other, where it's especially these couples, what can we get? What kind of information could we capture over time, and how do we use that information? So really testing, that very early stage evaluation of would this idea actually work that we had of capturing those pictures, and what concerns do people have about privacy and such. And I can imagine a number of them in the bathroom. A technology diary was another idea that they wanted to implement. So being able to capture information over time of how they use technology. And I think that Wendy's group has done studies like this. But can we determine that they've used an iPad, or would they provide us feedback each day at a certain time? I played Wii with my grandkids, or you can see the couple down in the bottom here playing Wii. It's kind of silly. But to develop an understanding over the population that we have of how they use technology and what their adoption is of these other products. And then there was this human performance detection one, which I thought was a very cool idea, because we already have a project in play that's called iTrem that uses the iPhone to track for Parkinson's, like when you have an event. And it's supposed to actually, so when you start detecting the shakes, you're supposed to pick up the phone and hold on to it, and it monitors the shakes and can track that. And then actually apparently one of the challenges that people have is when they stop, they will stop as a result of Parkinson's and not be able to restart. So it's kind of like freezing in place. So the hope was to use this application to detect that and give them a little stimulus to push them forward. And usually visual stimulus is the key. So I don't know exactly how that's working with the project, but they want to take some of that research that was done on detecting using the accelerometer in the iPhone device or whatever phone they're using, and start looking at that as a possible way to track, just have people do simple studies every day, or could be a gait analysis study holding onto the iPad against their chest and walking across the room. Or it could be a mental assessment. It could be checking their voice. But they wouldn't go through this battery of tests every day, but at intervals throughout a month, 3 months, something like that, to see what we can capture. And hand balancing acts was another one. So different ways that we can use an iPad, or get minimal technology into the home, and then ask them to go through these kind of tests to help us better understand. So I imagine that there will be some other ideas that come out of this, but this is a starting point. All right, so the final slide, looking for input from you. We've gotten some of that along the way. If you have any ideas on how we, other ideas on how we might recruit participants, definitely open to that. Suggestions for these kind of internal research projects. Maybe it's a question that you've had, or it could be that some of our researchers have a question that they've had in their mind that we could possibly fund internally to run in the test bed. So that's, or it could be funded by a federal grant. So anyway, there are a lot of ways that we can do these kind of test evaluations in the test bed.
Set yourself up where if you come off with kind of an offspring idea where you can patent it yourself.
Yeah, that's actually what we do a lot of that here at Georgia Tech, where one of the goals is to come up with ideas that could be protected. But really, it's not about the patenting, it's about solving problems. So if we can solve a problem in a way that is more successful than anything else out there, that's where our research folks are very keen to make advances.
And I guess if it's close to the product, you would just JV it with the manufacturer and say,
it could be that. It could be a spin-off company. It just depends on, there are a lot of different ways that we at Georgia Tech are approaching that. So, for example, there was a whole home sensing system called ElectroSense. They're using electrical lines in the home to track activity, just turning on and off switches. And another one called HydroSense for monitoring water. And we're doing studies on that right now in the Aware Home. but where this could be a very inexpensive way to capture information that would require a lot of sensors around the home, and actually installing of sensors on water lines, which is, if you're doing it in numerous locations, that's potentially problematic. So trying to keep it as inexpensive as possible to get the kind of activity data that's important to understand about individuals. And then that spun off into a startup company that eventually got purchased by Belkin. So Belkin is now looking at this as a product for their conserve line. And I've been saying this, that it would be out in the next year. And actually, I think I've been told that it is definite that there will be something out this year around that is the next generation of their conserve products, which right now are detecting that phantom power draw and such, and turning off those outlets. Or even smart switches, switches connected to the power outlet where you can shut off sections of your power to your computer. Maybe you wouldn't want to shut off the CPU, but you want to shut off all the peripherals, something like that. So that's one example. Other examples, we try to get companies in here to license technology. We target the companies, much like you had mentioned, to say, we think this would work well with your product. Would you license this? And they'll sometimes license the IP, and then they'll modify it for their own business.
One of the suggestions I would have is, it seems like if you had, and I know the brochure that you have is more educational and descriptive of what the program is. So I would think that just in marketing the system, getting that out to associations and organizations like retiree groups, retiree union groups, that are not necessarily residential focused. But in getting it out, number one is just an educational piece, because everybody likes to be aware and informed of what's happening, and then kind of that second layer of the recruitment piece. Should an association be interested? The other suggestion would be, I would imagine that someone has maybe contacted the Georgia Gerontology Society, and maybe even considering having a exhibit to inform members of GGS about what's going on. I think we have the direct service provider network there, and then we have a whole separate silo of academia and research.
Right.
I think it would be great if during those associations there was some communication between them.
Yeah, so we actually presented at the conference back in September. There are 4 different projects highlighted, and this was one that I talked about. So it was a start, but there were many other parallel tracks. So I think that maybe it would be worthwhile to target the group as a whole. But thank you for that suggestion. Any other ideas for infrastructure that we might consider that you think would be key to having people's homes to either most likely for enabling the testing of these products, but obviously the internet gateway, that's a pretty key one. The iPad or some kind of tablet as a feedback device, so that we could push out surveys and ask them to provide us feedback either on, it could be this kind of technology diary, or it could be just a survey that asks, if you had this product in your home, what do you think of it? Or just simple questions.
We belong to the National Association of Aging in Place Council. That might be, have you come by and talk to them one time. It's a whole concern of different vendors, different people in that industry might be able to give you some insight too. I can drop you an email.
Okay. So I'm actually working with Leading Age, which is a similar, they're more technology centric. So one of the things we'll probably do is get something on their site for the industry folks, because we want to keep it Georgia centric for the recruitment, but national for the industry, obviously. And Leading Age, Maj Awan he's director of the group, and he's been great at recommending how we might go about this. And he definitely he suggested Walter Coffey as a starting point here in Georgia. But I think it's going to, I want to look at other possibilities. So we went to Leading Age, went to a lot of the conference back in October, and talked to a lot of the vendors. And I think it gave me a better sense of who might be good targets for the technology, because some require ecosystems that we don't have, which we might build up. So the care ecosystem is something that we know is extremely important in the success of the product, but it may just be initially we're doing an assessment of how usable is it, which doesn't need that population that is at a level of needing caring. But as we move into that stage, we would need a test bed with care coordinators, care providers, nurses, et cetera, in the mix. So that's something that we're open to consider as well. So but we're going to have to work with partners to develop that. Okay.
Exciting project.
So just related to the infrastructure question about having internet gateways in homes, have you considered or experienced with the current participants any logistical issues with technical support? So our lab is currently running a study bringing computers into homes with internet. Internet's not working. I think it's my webpage. We get several calls in a small study population.
Yep.
To what extent are you prepared to deal with?
So I knew from the stories that this was going to be a challenge. And you bring something new into someone's home and they assume that you're the reason for everything failing. I learned from folks like Simple C.
You own the whole thing.
Yeah, yeah. So we don't know yet how this is going to pan out. I suspect it will require some percentage of time of our management group to deal with those kind of questions. But I had no idea how to predict how much that would cost, in personnel time. And so yeah, it's definitely going to be a learning experience, and that's as soon as we put this little robot in the home, do the phones light up? Yeah. So we'll see. Right now, there's really nothing that we have put into their homes except for coming and doing the quick. We've just done the induction surveys, so captured pictures, and there were a couple of people who had issues with the taking of pictures, so we did everything else, and that may be that when a product comes up that we need to understand the home that they aren't considered for that product, but we'll see. It's definitely a learning phase right now. But by June, after we've run a couple of these studies, we should have some experience and hopefully know how to deal with it.
That's a great question. And that would be where either naturally occurring retirement community clusters or CCRCs would aid you on that.
Yeah. Yep. All right. And then any other ideas for, and then this is something that can be ongoing, but internal projects that might be tested in this that we haven't considered yet. So I know that there are a number that are on the table, but I think we probably should keep a running list of questions that people say, how does the touchscreen work versus this or that, and how can we figure out ways to try to work that in. And there should be a time frame aspect to that, and not just a usability study. I think that's what this test bed is all about, is getting that long-term understanding of the challenges. So.
That's why I think the launch sequence is so interesting. So like the novelty effect may wear off after a month, and
Right.
this little robot that now collects dust after a month.
Yep.
It's no longer fun.
And the other part of that is that over the course of a month, they have the opportunity to connect with it. So from the stories from the initial study were that they were putting hats on the robot and personalizing it, much this. So that's what we want to find out, is what do they name the robot? If unfortunately, we'll probably tell them that the robot is Autumn, but will they continue calling the robot Autumn or, yeah.
You hope they do.
Much like I have my conversations with Siri and get mad at her very often. Yeah. I'm sorry, Brian, I cannot do that right now.
I have a question
So I think that gets to the level of where does it has to be something that is functioning, that you have the numbers, and we have to basically evaluate it and make sure it's not going to cause a lot of anxiety for both sides, if it fails. So we need to make sure that it is robust. And I think that's where Dennis folds in his requirement that there not be any goobering around in the larger number of homes or with individuals. But I think he's I think he's now comfortable with this idea of having 30 to 40 homes that we could use as that kind of testing ground at the early stage. So people who are willing to have researchers in there more frequently than we're planning right now. Any other questions? No, go.
Higher level question. So, like, is GC home lab your independent evaluation for a population of 50 and older? Are you guys the only ones that are doing this?
Well,
like immediately I think of IDEO, who helps with
right,
design and
right.
photographic studies and stuff. So what niche are you?
I think what we are offering that others aren't at this point. Now, we're starting to see the CROs, the clinical research organizations, kind of moving from just medication testing into product testing as well. But they may become our partners in this. So we have a defined set of homes that we know about the population, and we can quickly get a study up and running. We have the expertise to get the IRB in place. That's a requirement of FDA, is that you have IRB before you can claim the data. And if you didn't collect under IRB, you have to go and restart your captures collection. Institute Review Board, so human subject protection. And so that's another aspect. And then we also have the expertise to make recommendations on improvements, do the white paper. We have the Georgia Tech name, so we have to be very careful about respecting that name and not screwing up. So all of this is coming into play, and as we build up and develop that reputation, that GTRI already has a great reputation. So we just have to build this up on what they already have.
Is there then a potential long-term goal to create sort of like an aging certified product, like they do have for like cribs and
Yeah.
babies have certified by the regional.
The Underwriters Laboratory, that really was started just for that purpose years ago, decades ago.
But I wonder if we can create an
But
aging-
specific to aging, that was actually one of the selling points that we had considered in the beginning. I think we need to get up to speed and see what works before we start deciding what a certification is going to look like. But it was considered. So it's kind of, we'll toss it out there for the future and maybe
And there are some universities trying to do this.
with the certificate, with the aging,
Trying to do what you described.
the testing in the homes. Yeah. So we already have a lot of medical schools out there that are looking at these types of products from a not necessarily usability, but I guess in a way it becomes usability, but the effectiveness. So how does this fit into, especially the monitoring aspect? What can we learn from populations with dementia with these kind of products? So Duane, who was in here last month with the Grand Care product and the sensors that would go into the home, is testing with Oregon Health and Science University because they already have a population that is involved in a study related to dementia. How that, if it's effective in doing that FDA approval stage. So, but it's more clinical, it is more centric around the clinical aspects, and I think that's where we're trying to grow, as getting earlier than the clinical even, getting that, just the usability aspect where that's equally as important. And I'm sure there are others, but I know that Oregon Health and Science University is not able to do at the capacity that we're thinking. They'll accept studies that fit into their research, because I've had this conversation in planning this out with Jeff Kay. who is director of the Orcatech labs there. And they're, you know, I think Duane's fit in very well with what with what their research agenda is.
Do any of the parts require like a FDA, like submission for like medical products? You know what I mean?
Right, so there are different levels of FDA requirement. The 510K is, I'm pretty sure that Simple Seat, have you gone through that process?
Do an evaluation, and as long
Yeah.
as we don't make any outlandish claims.
Right. So and was that your testing, your own testing that?
There were two consulting groups in Washington that exclusively do FDA consulting.
Yep.
And we got a major law firm, and all three agreed that as long as you don't do something stupid like, say, our program cures Alzheimer's.
Right.
Or just something really ridiculous. It's not a medical device.
Okay. So, and those are the distinctions that are kind of, there's some shift now. I know that Simple C at least went through that process because they wanted to make sure that from the beginning they were ready for these requirements. And similarly, there's, oh golly, Detect. Can't remember the company, Zenda Technologies. Lawrence Catchpole, who's been running Zenda, has, he had done these kind of initial studies as well to ensure that he wanted to go through the process in case FDA requires in the future that they get this kind of approval. So, and when I say the different stages, there are 3 stages of, and I'm sorry, I'm not an expert on this, I'm still learning, but there are 3 stages of product, one that's just 510K clearance, I believe it's termed, and then there's the approval process for I think phase 2 and phase 3, if there are products like yours out there, anyway, I'll get in too deep if I go too far, but we are aware of this. We've got some people building up expertise around us involved in the effort, and who will help in determining how we get the requirements in place. Yeah, and Dennis Folds, who's really been helping push this through GTRI, he's very familiar with the IRB requirements of it being on the, is he director? Chair of?
And really, any responsible group starting a company in this space would need to determine all this very early.
Yeah.
Because essentially, if you walk down this blindly and then are determined by the FDA to be a medical device, that's the equivalent almost of the death penalty. Because that's a 3-year clinical trial, $3, $4, $5 million. That's a pretty big deal.
iTrim is a good example, because if they came in initially with a claim that just said that they were looking at tremors and trying to measure them, they wouldn't have needed FDA approval. Once they said that they were going to use it for analyzing Parkinson's and making it more of a medical application, then it needed to go through the FDA process. So you can do initial testing on a product to look at different aspects of how it's going to work without it going through the FDA. But once you start making
claims
about diagnosis or treatment, then and it could be, and there are different levels of FDA approval that are required.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. If you have any other questions, feel free to email me. There are, I think there's, it's because I keep typing and getting off the slide. More information on the home lab is at homelab.gtri.govtech.edu. And I guess that's it. If you'd like to contact Brad Fain, his email is right here, and I have cards somewhere here if you'd like one.